Okay, we're changing out the valve guides here in the head. This here is your stock valve guides in this one. So Harley, at least on this 05 bike, whatever it is, 05, 06, they left a gap between the shoulder here and the valve guide. Try to get there where you can see it. There, I think you can see it, maybe. Anyway, there's a shoulder between the lip here and the head. Hear my finger dropping down on it. So it sticks up a little high. So these are sitting up. The intakes are about 770 up. That's from the valve seat surface here. Spring seat surface, the top tip of the guide. The exhaust are a little closer. They're about 760 or so. And they have that same lip up. And on the other side in here, we have a square cut guide up here in the tops. And tips on this side, which don't flow quite as good as the tapered ones. So these are the stock Harley guides here. The intake and exhaust are the same. These are the kibble white guides here. This is the exhaust. This one here is the intake. So they're the same overall height, and they have the shoulder basically in the same spot. So when you go all the way against the shoulder, you're going to have about 730 thou clearance between the head and the top of the stem here, or the top of the guide. So it varies slightly. It depends on how much you push on the snap ring. Now if you keep beating against the snap ring, it just pushes it right off. It doesn't hardly slow it down at all because you're pushing so hard getting them in. It's not really a good stop. So if you wait until the guide has a pushback on you where it hits something, you won't feel it. You just push it right through the head. So you got to be careful. Now the exhaust guide is the same overall height, but you see how the shoulder's cut higher because the heads are a little bit thicker on the exhaust than the intake. And you can see how the Harley guide, it's the same one all the way up. So it's closer to the exhaust guide on how it's made here. And you can see the marks here from the intake port. So kibble cuts the guide to the height of the port there. So it gives you more of a high flow design. And you can see the difference in the diameter of the tips up in here. So the tapered tip flows more air. Now this set I already pushed in. So I got them all the way against the shoulder on this side. And then over on this side here, you can see how you have the tapered tip in there. So it'll flow more air that way. So that's the difference in them. And you can see how that the guides, the taper in the guide, it's hard to get there where you can see it. Not moving the camera, I'm moving the head around. So anyway, the taper of the guide ends at the port. So yeah, there's a good angle you can kind of see in there. So you can see how the taper ends right where the port starts at. And see how the exhaust is higher up, so it has a higher up shoulder. Now in a racing job, I'll put intakes on both sides, and I'll cut that exhaust valve guide boss down and raise the height of the port up to like what the intake is, so it'll increases the volume through the port. So I get this wire here, I kind of stick it between the fin here to half-ass hold it out of the way here so it's not flopping around. Otherwise you gotta get the tool and pull out the compression release here, but just work around, it's easier. When it starts bothering me, I'll take it out. Okay, so we'll go ahead and knock out the guide here on the other head. So I went ahead and put a little CRC here for lubricant on the valve. You squirt right here on the top of the guide right here. So just squirt a little bit right on there. Get some goop. There we go. Okay, that gives you a little bit of lubricant on the guide. So when the guide starts coming out, there's just a little bit of a lube right here, so hopefully it won't gull up as you're pulling it out. This is what the exhaust is. You can see how much hotter it is. Alright, so I'm going to knock these out. Now I use a piece of wood here to beat against. And I just knock it out right here on the bottom of the port. I overhang the top of the piece of wood here a little bit. And then I have a driver right here I made up that just goes in the guide, supports it pretty good. You just beat on this. And make sure this is undercut smaller than what the head is, so it'll go right through the head up until this point here. You try not to hit it that far if you can avoid it. Just use a standard ball peen hammer. I like the little medium-sized one here because it gives better control. You can hear the good solid hit. Kind of wiggle the stem around a little bit here, the barber. And as the guide starts coming out easier at the bottom, you start hearing how it sounds a little different. See, now it's poking out a little further now. At the very end, you just barely lightly touch it. And I put my finger on the end of the guide so I can kind of tell what it's doing. So that's our intake. Get the exhaust out, just do the same thing, drop it around the other side. Deal. Hear that heavy ring kind of goes away a little bit. So the further you get on the guide, the less pressure's on it, so it comes out a little easier. If you hit it too hard, you can slip off, hit the head gasket surface, which is not good, obviously. You can run your tool right into the port, which can chip it or indent it a little bit. Not good again. Now we use the wood because the wood is soft compared to aluminum, so it doesn't damage the surfaces. Even though my workbench is pretty smooth and clean, it's steel against it. It's a little bit harder on it. Okay, so you gotta make sure you put the right guide in the right hole. This here is the exhaust side, so we use the exhaust guide. I put a special press fit lube on it here that Sun makes. Makes it slide in a little bit easier. So that's this stuff here. Looks like it's a B200L. It's some stinky high sulfur stuff. Now this here, I got to do this so you can kind of see a little bit, but my head's blocking the view slightly. Basically, you just kind of hold it in the right angle, and then lightly hit it with your hammer to kind of self-center it. Once it's kind of centered, then you start hitting on it. Now, I'm using a 1/over guide because the standards tend to be a little soft going in. This is going to be a high-performance motor, so I'll make sure it's good and tight. On a stock street bike motor with low pressure springs and you don't run it very hard, the standard press fit's okay. See how hard it is? So it's a nice hard press button. Yeah. So you can see exactly where it's at. There we go. So you can't really see it, but if the press fit lube goes under that snap ring, as soon as I see the lube start to squirt out slightly, then I know the clip's against the head. So that gives you an indication of where you're at. But you can always stop like I did and just double check it. Then you come back and just do a quick measurement to make sure you're fine. So we're about 715, 720. So this one's an extra 10 or so more than the other ones I did. So I might have pushed on the clip a little bit, or the guide might be slightly different in height. It's hard to tell. If you drop below 700, you're pushing the clip off though. Okay, now we're going over the intake port. So we use the shorter guide here. Put the lube on it again. Now the intake, you don't have to be in quite as hard because the head doesn't get as hot on the side. So the press fit doesn't have to be quite as heavy. But, this one should go in fairly hard too. Very important to let the guide kind of self-center. There, now it's centered. After it goes in about 100th hour or so, it kind of pretty well self-centers pretty good. And then you start hitting on it. See, with a guy with a real shoulder on it, it'll get really hard at the very end. You hear a real high metallic ring to your hit. See, this one we're up there about 725, 730. I saw the oil just starting to squeeze a little bit, so we'll stop at that number. So we're not putting a really high lift cam in this, so we don't have to push the envelope too much. The higher the lift is, the more you got to come back and trim this for clearances. So you got to kind of pay attention to what you're doing on the whole job, because you do things always slightly different. The higher the lift is, the more work you got to do. All right, so the guides are in. That's what they look like in this one. You go back and you look in the guide, make sure there's no cracks and no big chunks of aluminum sticking up, which means you curl a big chip putting it in, which means the guide's not tight. So these went in really nice. You can hear how I was hitting on it. It was hitting a nice strong ring each time I hit it, so that's what you're listening for. Okay, now I'll go ahead and clean up our valves and then we can hone our guides.